The scream cut through the dusty twilight air of Ouray, Colorado, rattling the windows of the modest cabin where Martha Hayes knelt beside a struggling mother. And in that moment, she began to sing the old hymn her own mother had taught her, letting the melody wrap around the woman's fear like a warm blanket. It was July of 1878, and the summer heat had made everything harder, from the long rides between scattered homesteads to the difficult labors that seemed to multiply with each passing month. Martha had been a midwife for 3 years now, ever since she turned 18, and her mother passed the sacred knowledge to her before succumbing to pneumonia that bitter winter. The mining town of Ouray had exploded with new settlers, prospectors, and families hoping to strike it rich in the San Juan Mountains. And with them came the constant need for someone who understood the mysteries of bringing life into this harsh world. The woman on the bed, Sarah Thompson, gripped Martha's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her husband paced outside, his boots thudding against the wooden porch in a rhythm that matched his wife's labored breathing. Martha continued singing, her voice clear and steady despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. She had been awake for nearly 2 days straight, having attended another birth just yesterday morning on the other side of town. "That is beautiful," Sarah gasped between contractions, her face slick with sweat. "Please do not stop." Martha smiled and brushed the damp hair from Sarah's forehead, never letting her voice falter. The song was an old Scottish tune, something about heather and hills and coming home. The words did not matter as much as the sound itself, the way it gave the laboring women something to focus on beyond their pain, something to anchor them when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Outside, unknown to Martha, a cowboy named Garrett Kane had just ridden into town after 3 months on the trail, driving cattle from Texas to the Colorado high country. He was 24 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with calloused hands and a quiet way about him that made most people comfortable in his presence. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Rusty, was tired and needed stabling, so Garrett had dismounted at the livery near the edge of town. The stable hand told him the nearest boarding house was just up the street, past the Thompson place. As Garrett walked, his saddlebags slung over one shoulder and his rifle cradled in the other arm, he heard it. The voice. It floated through the evening air like something not quite of this earth, carrying notes that seemed to ease the very ache in his travel-worn muscles. He stopped dead in his tracks, standing in the middle of the dirt road, and just listened. He had heard saloon girls sing, had heard church choirs on the rare Sundays he spent in town, but this was different. This had something raw and real in it, something that reached right inside his chest and squeezed. The voice rose and fell, wrapping around words he could not quite make out from this distance. Without thinking about it too much, Garrett found himself drifting toward the source, toward the small cabin where lamplight glowed warm in the windows. He knew he should not intrude, knew it was not his business, but his feet carried him forward anyway until he stood just beyond the fence that marked the Thompson property. Inside, Martha felt the shift in Sarah's labor. The baby was coming now, and she moved with practiced efficiency, guiding and encouraging, her voice never stopping even as her hands worked. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and wailing, Martha tied off the cord and wrapped the infant in clean linen before placing the tiny boy in his mother's arms. Only then did her song fade to a gentle hum, and finally to silence. "You have a son," Martha said softly, her own eyes wet with the tears that always came at these moments, no matter how many births she attended. "A healthy, beautiful son." Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time, and Martha stepped back to give the new mother space to marvel at her child. She cleaned her hands in the basin of water she had prepared earlier, then stepped outside to tell the father the good news. She nearly collided with Garrett, who stood just beyond the porch steps, his hat in his hands. "Oh," Martha said, startled. She had not expected anyone but Mr. Thompson. "Can I help you?" Garrett stared at her for a long moment, taking in her tired face, the strands of dark hair that had escaped from her practical bun, the smudges of exhaustion beneath her green eyes. She was not beautiful in the way of the painted ladies in the saloons, but there was something luminous about her, something that made his throat tight. "I heard you singing," he finally managed to say. "I was just passing by and I heard you singing." Martha's expression softened into understanding. "You are not Mr. Thompson." "No, madam. Name is Garrett Kane. I just rode in from Texas." "Well, Mr. Kane, mother and baby are doing fine, but this is a private residence. If you will excuse me, I need to inform the father." Martha moved past him, expecting him to leave, but instead she found him still standing there when she returned from the other side of the house, where she had found Mr. Thompson chopping wood to keep himself occupied during the long wait. The reunion between husband and wife was tender, and Martha gathered her supplies quietly, giving them privacy. When she finally emerged from the cabin with her worn leather medical bag, the sun had fully set, and stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Garrett was still there, now sitting on the fence rail, waiting. "Mr. Kane, do you make a habit of lingering outside strangers' homes?" Martha asked, but there was no real reproach in her voice. She was too tired for anger, and besides, there was something in his face that was not threatening. Just earnest and a bit lost. "No, madam," Garrett said, sliding down from the fence. "I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable. It is just that your singing, well, it was the most beautiful thing I have heard in a very long time. Maybe ever." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "It is just something I do for the mothers. It helps them through the pain." "It was more than that," Garrett insisted, then seemed to realize how intense he sounded. He stepped back, giving her space. "I am sorry. You must think I am touched in the head. It has been a long trail and maybe I am just weary." "You look weary," Martha agreed, her natural instinct to care for others overriding her wariness. "Have you found lodging? Was heading to the boarding house when I heard you. Mrs. Fletcher runs it. Tell her Martha Hayes sent you, and she will give you a fair rate." Martha adjusted her bag and started walking up the street toward her own small house on the other side of town. To her surprise, Garrett fell into step beside her. "Might I walk with you? These streets are dark and a lady should not be alone." Martha almost laughed. "Mr. Kane, I have walked these streets alone at all hours for 3 years now. I am quite capable." "I do not doubt your capability, madam, but it would ease my mind." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that made Martha's protest die on her lips. She nodded, and they walked together in silence for a while, their boots scuffing against the packed earth of the road. Ouray was settling in for the night, though the saloons were just beginning to come alive with raucous piano music and laughter. "How long have you been a midwife?" Garrett asked eventually. 3 years come September. My mother taught me before she died. That must be hard work." "It is the best work," Martha corrected gently. "Every time I help bring a new life into this world, it feels like a miracle. Even when I am so tired I can barely stand, even when things go wrong, it still feels like the most important thing I could possibly do with my life." Garrett nodded slowly, understanding something in her words that went beyond the surface meaning. "I have spent the last 6 years driving cattle. It is honest work, pays decent, but I cannot say it gives me that feeling. Mostly it is just dust and heat and trying not to get trampled." "Why do you do it then?" "Because I am good at it. Because I do not know what else to do." He paused, then added quietly, "Because I have not found a reason to stop yet." They had reached Martha's small house, a neat cabin with a garden out front where she grew herbs for her medicines. A lamp burned low in the window, left there by her neighbor who checked on the place when Martha was out on long calls. "This is me," Martha said, stopping at the gate. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Kane, even though it was unnecessary. Would you sing again sometime?" The words tumbled out of Garrett before he could stop them, and he immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, not for me specifically, just if I heard you were attending someone, could I, that is, would it be improper if you want to hear me sing?" Martha interrupted his fumbling, and there was a softness in her voice now, a recognition of the vulnerability in his request. "Yes," Garrett said simply. "I have never heard anything like it. It made me feel, I do not know how to explain it. Like maybe there was something more to life than just surviving from one day to the next." Martha studied him in the dim light spilling from her window. He was handsome in a rough way, with strong features and honest eyes. There was dust coating his clothes and hat, and he smelled of leather and horse and the open trail. She should send him away, should maintain proper distance. But she had heard the hunger in his voice, not for her body but for something deeper, for connection and beauty and meaning. "I will be at the church social on Saturday evening," she heard herself say. "They usually ask me to sing a hymn or two. You could come to that." Garrett's face transformed with a smile that made him look younger, less careworn. "I will be there. Thank you, Miss Hayes. It is Martha." "Garrett," he replied, and they stood there for a moment longer before Martha forced herself to turn away and walk up the path to her door. She could feel his eyes on her back until she went inside, and only then did she hear his footsteps retreating down the street. Inside, Martha lit more lamps and put water on to boil for tea. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from exhaustion or from the encounter with Garrett Kane, she could not say. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was just a drifter who would move on soon enough, that she should not attach any significance to his words. But as she prepared for bed, she found herself humming, and the melody that emerged was the same one she had sung to Sarah Thompson, the same one that had drawn Garrett to her in the first place. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm. Martha attended 2 more births, both easier than Sarah's had been, and made her rounds checking on new mothers and babies throughout the area. Ouray was growing fast, the silver strikes in the mountains drawing more people every week, and with them came the inevitable needs of a growing town. Martha's services were always in demand, and she had little time to think about gray-eyed cowboys who appeared out of the twilight. But Garrett was thinking about her. He had found work at one of the nearby ranches, helping to break horses and mend fences. The foreman, a grizzled man named Dutch, had been happy to hire someone with Garrett's experience, especially since he was willing to work for fair wages and did not cause trouble. Garrett found a room above the general store, a small space with a bed and a chair and a window that looked out over the main street. It was more permanent than anywhere he had stayed in years, and he was surprised to find that the thought did not bother him. On Saturday evening, Garrett bathed at the public bathhouse, put on his cleanest shirt, and combed his hair until it lay flat. He felt nervous as a schoolboy as he walked to the small church at the center of town. The social was already underway when he arrived, with tables set up outside in the churchyard where people had laid out food to share. Families clustered together, children ran shrieking between the adults' legs, and someone was tuning a fiddle in preparation for dancing later. Garrett scanned the crowd, looking for Martha's dark hair and slender frame. He found her standing with a group of women near the church steps, holding a baby who belonged to someone else. She was laughing at something one of the other women had said, and the sound carried across the yard to where he stood. His heart did something strange in his chest, a sort of stutter step that made him catch his breath. "You lost, stranger." An older woman had appeared at his elbow, eyeing him with friendly curiosity. "Have not seen you at services before." "I am new in town, madam. Name is Garrett Kane. I was invited to hear the singing." The woman's face broke into a knowing smile. "Ah, you are here for our Martha, then. She does have the voice of an angel, does she not? I am Beatrice Fletcher. I believe you are staying at my boarding house." "Yes, madam. You have been a gracious host. Come along, then. I will introduce you properly. Cannot have you lurking in the shadows like some kind of outlaw." Beatrice hooked her arm through his and towed him across the yard before he could protest. Martha looked up as they approached, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw Garrett. "Martha, dear, this young man claims he was invited to hear you sing. Says his name is Garrett Kane." Beatrice's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Mr. Kane, you came," Martha said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she had not quite believed he would. "I said I would," Garrett replied simply. He nodded to the other women who were watching with undisguised interest. Small towns had few secrets, and a new man paying attention to the midwife would be prime fodder for gossip. Before anyone could say anything else, the preacher called for attention. It was time for the hymns before the dancing began. Martha handed the baby back to its mother and moved toward the church steps, where she would stand to sing. Garrett found a spot where he could see her clearly, his hat in his hands. When Martha sang, the whole churchyard fell silent. Her voice rose clear and strong into the evening air, carrying a hymn about grace and redemption that made even the children stop their playing to listen. She sang 3 songs, each one more beautiful than the last, and when she finished, the applause was long and heartfelt. Garrett could not applaud. He just stood there, frozen, feeling something crack open inside his chest. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it, this feeling of being connected to something larger than himself. Not just her voice, though that was part of it, but her. The way she gave herself completely to the music, holding nothing back. The way she smiled at the end, flushed and happy. The way she immediately turned to help an elderly woman down from the steps, never thinking about her own moment of glory. The fiddles started up, and couples began to form for dancing. Garrett worked up his courage and approached Martha, who was accepting congratulations from various townspeople. "That was even more beautiful than the other night," he said when he finally reached her side. Martha turned to him, and her smile softened into something more personal. "I am glad you came. Would you, that is, do you dance?" "I do. Would you dance with me?" Martha hesitated for just a moment, aware of all the eyes on them, aware that accepting would start talk that might not be easy to stop. But when she looked at Garrett's open, hopeful face, she found she did not care about the gossip. "I would like that," she said, and placed her hand in his. They joined the other couples in the yard, and when the fiddle struck up a lively reel, Garrett proved himself a capable if not fancy dancer. He moved with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, guiding Martha through the steps with a firm but gentle hand at her waist. They did not talk much, but they smiled at each other, and when the dance ended they stood there a moment longer than necessary, neither wanting to let go. "Another?" Garrett asked. "Yes," Martha said, and they danced again, and again after that. Between dances, they found themselves standing together at the edge of the gathering, watching the festivities but not really part of them. Garrett got them both cups of lemonade, and they sipped in companionable silence until Martha spoke. "You should know that I am not, that is, I do not usually, I have not had much time for this." She gestured between them, her usual eloquence deserting her. "Neither have I," Garrett admitted. Been on the trail most of my adult life. Never stayed in one place long enough to get to know someone properly. Are you staying in Ouray? I took a job at the Morrison Ranch. Dutch says he can use me through the winter if I want the work. You want it? Garrett really looked at her, and said truthfully, I did not think I did. Thought I would earn enough for supplies and move on like always. But now I think maybe I could put down roots here, if there was a reason to. Martha felt her breath catch. They barely knew each other, had spent perhaps an hour in total in each other's company, but she felt the pull between them as surely as the tide obeyed the moon. Mr. Kane, Garrett, please. Garrett, she amended, and his name felt right in her mouth. I want to be clear with you. My work is demanding. I am called away at all hours. Sometimes I am gone for days if I am needed at a remote homestead. I have dedicated my life to being a midwife, and I will not give that up for anyone. I would never ask you to, Garrett said immediately. What you do is important. More important than pushing cattle around, that is certain. I heard it in your voice when you talked about it the other night. That kind of calling is rare, and it should be honored. Not all men see it that way. Then not all men are worth your time, Garrett replied, and there was a fierceness in his voice that made Martha's heart skip. I will be honest with you too, Martha. I do not know what I am doing here. I do not know the first thing about courting a woman properly. But I know that when I heard you sing, something shifted inside me. I know that I think about you every hour of every day since we met. I know that I want to try if you will let me. I want to see where this goes. Martha set down her cup of lemonade with a slightly trembling hand. I think I would like that too. They smiled at each other, shy and hopeful, and when the fiddle started up again, they returned to the dance floor as if drawn by invisible threads. The evening deepened into night, lanterns were lit around the yard, and still they danced. By the time the social ended, everyone in Ouray knew that the midwife and the new cowboy had found something in each other. Over the next weeks, Garrett and Martha fell into a pattern. He would stop by her house in the evenings when his work was done, unless she was out on a call. Sometimes they would sit on her porch and talk, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Sometimes they would walk through town together, and Martha would point out various families, telling him about the babies she had delivered and how they were thriving. Sometimes Garrett would bring her small gifts, a bunch of wildflowers picked on his ride back from the ranch, a pretty stone he found in the creek, a book he thought she might like from the general store. Martha found herself singing more often, even when there was no laboring mother to soothe. She sang while she worked in her garden, while she prepared her herbs and tinctures, while she cleaned her instruments and restocked her bag. The melodies that emerged were brighter now, less mournful, and more filled with joy. Garrett, for his part, threw himself into his work with new energy. He broke horses with patience and skill, mended miles of fence line, and made himself indispensable to Dutch and the Morrison Ranch. When the other ranch hands went into town on Saturday nights to drink and gamble, Garrett saved his money and spent his free time with Martha instead. The men teased him about being whipped, but he just smiled and said nothing. Let them think what they wanted. He knew what he had found. One evening in late August, Martha was called to a homestead about 10 miles outside of town. The message came in the form of a frantic husband who pounded on her door just after sunset. His wife had been in labor for hours and was struggling. Martha grabbed her bag and her medical coat, but before she could head to the livery to get a horse, Garrett appeared. He had been on his way to visit her and had seen the commotion. I will take you, he said, already moving toward where Rusty was tied. It will be faster with someone who knows the trails in the dark. Martha did not argue. She climbed up behind him on the horse, her bag secured to the saddle, and wrapped her arms around his waist. They rode hard through the darkness, following the husband who led the way on his own mount. Martha rested her cheek against Garrett's back, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Despite the urgency of the call, she felt safe. When they reached the homestead, Martha slid down and hurried inside while Garrett tended to the horses. The situation was serious. The mother, a young woman named Elizabeth, barely 20 years old, was exhausted and fading. The baby was breech, and Martha knew she would have to turn it if there was to be any hope of survival for both mother and child. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, her voice rising in song almost without conscious thought. The melody wrapped around the room, creating a pocket of calm in the midst of crisis. Outside, Garrett stood on the porch with the husband, offering what comfort he could with his presence. He could hear Martha singing through the thin walls, and he prayed harder than he had in years. It took hours. Martha's voice grew hoarse, but she did not stop singing as she worked. She managed to turn the baby, inch by careful inch, and finally, just before dawn, a squalling infant girl entered the world. Elizabeth was weak but alive, and Martha cleaned and swaddled the baby before collapsing into a chair, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Garrett came in when he heard the baby's cries, and his eyes went immediately to Martha. She looked like she might fall over at any moment, her face gray with fatigue. Without asking permission, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her outside to where he had laid out bedrolls in the wagon shed. "Rest," he said firmly, laying her down on the blankets. "I will keep watch and wake you if you are needed." Martha wanted to protest, wanted to say she should stay close to monitor mother and baby, but her body betrayed her. Her eyes closed almost involuntarily, and she was asleep within seconds. Garrett covered her with his coat and sat nearby, keeping vigil. The sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and still Martha slept. He watched her breathe, watched the tension slowly ease from her face, and felt something fierce and protective rise up in him. When Martha finally woke, it was mid-morning and she sat up in a panic. "The baby, I need to, mother and child are both resting comfortably," Garrett assured her. "The grandmother arrived about an hour ago and has been tending to them. She said to let you sleep, that you earned it." Martha rubbed her eyes and accepted the canteen of water Garrett offered. She drank deeply, then looked at him properly. He had dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled look of someone who had not slept. "You stayed up all night watching over me," she said, "and it was not a question. Someone had to. You should have woken me. You needed rest." His voice was gentle but firm. "You cannot take care of others if you do not take care of yourself." Martha felt something warm bloom in her chest, spreading through her whole body. She reached out and took Garrett's hand, threading her fingers through his. "Thank you." "Always," he said, and the word hung in the air between them, weighted with promise. They stayed at the homestead another few hours, until Martha was satisfied that Elizabeth and the baby were stable. The grandmother fed them a hearty breakfast and pressed food into their hands for the journey back to Ouray. When they finally rode out, Martha sat in front of Garrett this time, leaning back against his chest while he held the reins around her. She felt safe and cherished in a way she never had before. "Garrett," she said as they rode through the afternoon sunshine. "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." She felt him tense behind her, then relax. His arms tightened around her slightly. "I know I am in love with you," he replied. "Have been since I heard you sing that first night." Martha turned in the saddle so she could see his face. "It has only been a few weeks." "Does that matter?" "No," she said, realizing it was true. "No, it does not matter at all." When they reached the outskirts of Ouray, Garrett pulled Rusty to a stop. He dismounted, then helped Martha down. They stood facing each other in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree, the town visible in the distance but still remote enough that they were alone. "Martha Hayes," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I do not have much to offer, just a job and a room and a horse and my word. But I swear to you, if you will have me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know you are loved. I will never stand in the way of your calling. I will ride with you to distant homesteads at all hours. I will wait on porches while you work your miracles. I will be whatever you need me to be." Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. "All I need is for you to be yourself. That is more than enough." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," Martha confirmed, and then Garrett was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. She kissed him back, pouring all her hope and joy and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. They rode the rest of the way into town holding hands, not caring who saw them or what anyone said. By evening, the news had spread through Ouray that the midwife and the cowboy were officially courting, and by the next day, bets were being placed in the saloon about how long until a wedding. The answer turned out to be 3 months. Garrett asked Martha to marry him on a crisp October evening, presenting her with a simple gold band he had commissioned from the town jeweler. She said yes without hesitation, and they were married in the same church where she had sung the night they danced together for the first time. It was a small ceremony, attended by most of the town. Martha wore a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Garrett wore his Sunday best with a new hat for the occasion. When the preacher asked Martha to sing as part of the ceremony, she looked at Garrett and sang the same Scottish tune that had drawn him to her all those months ago. There was not a dry eye in the church, and when Garrett kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. They moved into Martha's little house, which Garrett set about expanding to make more room. He built an addition that included a real surgery room where Martha could see patients and prepare her medicines, with shelves for her herbs and a proper examination table. He built a bigger bedroom and started framing out what would eventually be children's rooms, though they both agreed not to rush that particular blessing. Life settled into a new rhythm. Martha continued her work as a midwife, and Garrett continued at the ranch, though Dutch gave him more flexible hours so he could accompany Martha on her farther calls. They developed a reputation as a team, the singing midwife and her cowboy husband who would brave any weather or distance to help a family in need. In the evenings when they were both home, they would sit together on the porch Garrett had expanded, and Martha would sing while he whittled or mended tack. Sometimes he would join her in harmony, his voice rough but true, and those duets became precious to both of them. On Sundays, they sang together in church, and the congregation never tired of hearing them. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. In January, a blizzard trapped them in a remote cabin for 3 days while Martha tended to a difficult birth. They rationed food and kept the fire going, and Garrett sang to Martha to keep her spirits up when she was exhausted beyond measure. The mother and baby both survived, but it was close, and Martha had nightmares about it for weeks after. Garrett held her through those nights, whispering reassurances and singing the old songs back to her until she could sleep. In March, one of the ranch hands challenged Garrett to a fight, jealous of his position and his happiness. Garrett tried to avoid the confrontation, but eventually he had no choice. He won, but came home with bruised ribs and a black eye. Martha tended to him with gentle hands and a scolding tongue, making him promise to be more careful. He promised, and sealed it with a kiss that made her forget she was supposed to be angry. In June, they lost a mother and baby despite Martha's best efforts. It was a complication no one could have predicted, an internal hemorrhage that happened too fast to stop. Martha came home hollow-eyed and devastated, convinced she had failed. Garrett pulled her into his arms and let her cry, let her rage against the unfairness of it, and then reminded her gently of all the lives she had saved, all the families that were whole because of her skill and dedication. "You are not God," he told her. "You cannot control everything, but you show up, you give everything you have, and that matters more than you know." Through it all, their love deepened and strengthened. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. Garrett learned to read Martha's moods, to know when she needed comfort, and when she needed space to process her grief. Martha learned that Garrett's quiet nature hid a deep well of emotion, and that he expressed his love through actions rather than words, through 1,000 small kindnesses that accumulated into something enormous. In September, on their first anniversary, Martha discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett over dinner, nervous about how he would react. They had talked about children but had not actively planned for them, both agreeing that it would happen when it happened. Garrett's face went through a series of emotions so quickly Martha could not track them all. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. Finally, he stood up, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. "Are you happy about it?" he asked, searching her face. "I am terrified," Martha admitted. "But yes, I am happy. Are you?" "I am going to be a father," Garrett said, as if testing the words. Then, louder, with more certainty, "I am going to be a father." He picked Martha up and spun her around, making her laugh and scold him at the same time for being reckless. The pregnancy was not easy. Martha continued working until she was 7 months along, when the physical demands became too much. She trained another young woman in town, passing on some of her knowledge so that laboring mothers would not be without help. Garrett hovered protectively, which Martha found both endearing and frustrating. They bickered about it good-naturedly, but she knew his fear came from love. In late May of 1880, on a warm spring evening with the windows thrown open to catch the breeze, Martha went into labor. The other midwife, Emily, came to attend her, and Garrett found himself in the unusual position of being the one pacing outside. Except, he could not stay outside. He kept coming back in, checking on Martha, holding her hand until she squeezed so hard he thought his bones might break. "Sing to me," Martha gasped between contractions. "Please, Garrett, sing to me." So Garrett sang, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger as he found the melody. He sang the old Scottish tune, the one that had started everything, and he sang the hymns from church, and he sang songs his own mother had taught him as a child. Martha clung to his voice like a lifeline, and Emily worked efficiently around them both. When their son was born, red-faced and wailing with healthy lungs, Garrett cut the cord with trembling hands and then collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed. Martha cradled the baby against her chest, tears streaming down her face, and looked up at her husband. "We have a son," she said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Garrett looked at his wife and child at this perfect moment that felt like the culmination of everything that had led them to each other, and he knew. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel Kane, after your father." Martha's father had died when she was young, but she had told Garrett stories about him, about his kindness and his strength. The fact that Garrett had remembered and wanted to honor that memory made her love him even more than she thought possible. "Samuel," she agreed. "It is perfect." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a good baby, but he still woke several times a night to nurse, and Martha was run ragged trying to balance caring for him with getting back to her midwife duties. Garrett helped as much as he could, rocking Samuel to sleep, changing soiled cloths, and singing lullabies in the early morning hours when the baby was fussy. One night, about 3 months after Samuel's birth, Garrett woke to find Martha standing by the window with the baby in her arms, singing softly. The moonlight painted them both in silver, and Garrett thought his heart might burst from the beauty of the scene. He got up and went to stand behind his wife, wrapping his arms around both her and Samuel. "What are you singing?" he asked quietly. "The song I was singing the night you first heard me," Martha replied. "I was just thinking about that night. About how my life changed completely because you happened to be walking past at exactly the right moment." "Not happened," Garrett corrected. "I think we were meant to find each other. I think I was led to that cabin just as surely as you were led to become a midwife." Martha leaned back against him. "Do you believe in fate?" "I did not used to. But how else do you explain it? Out of all the towns I could have stopped in, all the nights I could have arrived, all the paths I could have taken, I ended up right there at the exact moment you were singing. That seems like more than coincidence." "Maybe you are right," Martha murmured. Samuel had fallen back asleep, and she carried him to the cradle Garrett had built, tucking him in with gentle hands. When she turned back, Garrett was watching her with an expression that still made her breath catch even after nearly 2 years together. "Come back to bed," he said, holding out his hand. "You need to rest while he is sleeping." "I am not tired anymore," Martha admitted. "Too much thinking." "Then think while lying down, at least. I will hold you." They climbed back into bed, and Martha nestled against Garrett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arms came around her, warm and secure, and she felt the tension drain from her body. "Garrett, thank you for asking me to sing to you forever. That night at the church social, when you said you wanted to see where this went, thank you for taking that chance." "I think I am the one who should be thanking you," Garrett replied. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home and a purpose and a family. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Martha corrected, and Garrett could not argue with that. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Samuel woke again a few hours later, they faced it together, as they faced everything. The years passed. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady temperament. When he was 2, Martha discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she was less fearful, more confident. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, and they named her Rose for the wildflowers that bloomed in the mountains. She was a tiny, delicate thing, but with a set of lungs that could wake the whole house when she was displeased. Garrett was promoted to foreman at the Morrison Ranch when Dutch retired, which meant better pay and the ability to hire men he trusted. He built that trust the same way he built everything, with patience and integrity. The ranch prospered under his management, and he was able to save money toward buying land of their own someday. Martha's reputation as a midwife continued to grow. Families would request her specifically, and she trained 2 more young women to help meet the demand. But she never stopped going out on calls herself, never stopped singing to the laboring mothers, never stopped treating each birth as the miracle it was. Garrett still accompanied her when he could, and Samuel and Rose got used to being bundled into wagons or left with trusted neighbors when their mother was called away. In 1884, Garrett and Martha bought 40 acres just outside of Ouray, with a stream running through it and a view of the mountains that took their breath away. Garrett built them a proper house, bigger than the cabin in town, with enough room for their growing family and Martha's medical practice. They kept the cabin in town as well, using it when Martha had calls in that area, but the ranch became their true home. They worked the land together, raising horses and a few cattle, growing vegetables and herbs. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and Rose was not far behind. In the evenings, the family would gather on the porch, and Martha would sing while Garrett played the guitar he had taught himself to play. The children would dance or chase fireflies, and later, when they were older, they would join in the songs. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, illnesses and injuries, losses and sorrows. But through it all, Garrett and Martha held fast to each other and to the love that had brought them together. Every night, no matter how tired they were or what challenges they faced, they took a moment to simply be together, to remember the gift they had been given. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett surprised Martha by taking her back to the Thompson cabin where they had first met. The Thompsons had moved away years before, but the current occupants had heard the story and graciously agreed to let them visit. They stood in the yard where Garrett had first heard Martha singing, and he took her hands in his. "You remember what I said to you that night?" he asked. "When I was fumbling all over my words trying to explain why I had been listening." "You said a lot of things," Martha replied with a smile. "You said my singing made you feel like there was more to life than just surviving from one day to the next. And it did. It does. Every day with you is more than I ever dreamed I could have. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting, to put down roots. You gave me a reason to stop running. And you gave me a partner," Martha said. "Someone who supports my calling instead of resenting it. Someone who sings with me instead of asking me to be quiet. Someone who loves me exactly as I am." "I do love you," Garrett said. "More with each passing year, which I would not have thought possible. You are my home, Martha Kane. You and our children and the life we have built together." "Will you sing with me?" Martha asked. Like we used to, so they sang together, their voices blending in harmony, and the years fell away until they were young again, just meeting, just falling in love. But this was better, because now they had the weight of shared history, the depth that comes from weathering storms together, the joy of a love that had been tested and proven true. By 1890, Samuel was 10 and Rose was 8. Samuel showed an interest in medicine and would often accompany his mother on her calls, learning as she had learned from her mother. Rose was wild and free, happiest on horseback racing through the meadows, and Garrett delighted in teaching her everything he knew about riding and roping. In August of that year, Martha was called to a particularly difficult berth in a mining camp high in the mountains. The conditions were rough, and the mother was very young and frightened. Martha spent 2 days there, singing almost constantly, and when she finally came home, she was quiet and withdrawn. Garrett found her in their bedroom, staring out the window at the mountains. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Bad one?" he asked gently. "She was 15, Martha said, her voice flat. 15 years old and alone. The father of the baby ran off when he found out. Her parents disowned her. She had no one. But she had you. For 2 days. But what happens after I leave? Where does she go? How does she care for a baby when she is barely more than a child herself?" "What did you do?" Martha turned in his arms. "I brought her here. She is in the guest room with the baby. I hope you do not mind." Garrett's answer was to kiss her forehead. "Of course I do not mind. This is your home. You can offer shelter to whoever needs it. She needs work, training. I was thinking I could teach her like I taught Emily and the others. She is smart and learns quickly. Then teach her. We have the room, and Lord knows there is always more work than one person can manage." The girl, whose name was Lucy, stayed with them for 6 months, learning the midwife's trade and helping around the ranch to earn her keep. Her baby, a son she named Thomas, thrived under Martha's care and the loving attention of the Kane family. Eventually, Lucy was confident enough to start taking on her own patients, and Martha helped her set up a small practice in one of the mining camps where the need was great. They kept in touch over the years, and Lucy never forgot the kindness that had been shown to her. More years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing independence of their children. Samuel decided to study medicine properly and left for Denver when he was 17, with his parents' blessing and support. Rose announced at 16 that she intended to run the ranch, and Garrett taught her everything he knew about horse breeding and land management. In 1898, when Martha was 40 and Garrett was 44, they welcomed their third and final child, another son they named Daniel. It was an unexpected pregnancy, and Martha joked that she should have known better at her age, but the baby was healthy and brought new life to the household. Samuel came home from medical school to meet his baby brother, and Rose treated the infant like a precious doll, carrying him everywhere. Garrett watched his wife with their newborn son, and marveled at how she was still the same woman he had fallen in love with 20 years before, still dedicated and passionate and full of grace. Her hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting into the sun. But to him, she was as beautiful as she had been that first night when he heard her sing. "What are you staring at?" Martha asked, catching his gaze. "You." Memorizing this moment. "We have had many moments, and I want to remember every single one," Garrett replied. He came to sit beside her on the bed, looking down at Daniel's sleeping face. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life with me instead of staying in town where it might have been easier to practice?" "Never," Martha said without hesitation. "This is exactly the life I was meant to live. You are exactly who I was meant to love. I would not change a single thing. Not even when I track mud through your clean house." "Well, maybe that," Martha conceded with a laugh, "but nothing else." They raised Daniel together, savoring these last years of having a child in the house. Rose took over more of the ranch management, as Garrett's joints started to ache from decades of hard work. Samuel finished his medical training and returned to Ouray to open a practice, partnering with his mother to provide comprehensive care to the growing community. Lucy, now an established midwife in her own right, sent patients to them and worked alongside Martha on difficult cases. In 1903, Garrett and Martha celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they had ever helped or befriended over the years. The house and yard were packed with people, multiple generations of families that Martha had helped bring into the world. There was music and dancing and food, and at the center of it all were Garrett and Martha, still holding hands after all these years. As the evening wore on and the crowd began to thin, someone called for Martha to sing. The request was taken up by others until it became a chant. Martha looked at Garrett and he nodded with a smile. They stood together in front of the assembled crowd, and Martha began the old Scottish tune that had started everything. But this time, she was not alone. Garrett's voice joined hers in harmony, and then Samuel and Rose and even young Daniel added their voices. Other guests joined in, and soon the night was filled with music, layers upon layers of sound rising up to the stars. When the song ended, there was a long moment of perfect silence before the applause began. Martha had tears on her cheeks, and Garrett pulled her close, kissing her in front of everyone. The crowd cheered, and someone struck up a lively tune on the fiddle. Garrett led Martha into a dance, moving with the same quiet competence he had shown that first night at the church social all those years ago. "Still love me?" he asked as they spun across the grass. "More than ever," Martha replied. "You, to the end of time and beyond," Garrett said. "I never did stop being amazed that you chose me. It was the easiest choice I ever made." They danced until their feet ached and their breath came short. And then they danced some more, surrounded by family and friends, surrounded by the life they had built together from nothing more than a song and a chance meeting, and the courage to believe in something bigger than themselves. The years continued to roll by. Garrett retired from active ranch work, though he still supervised and advised. Martha reduced her practice as well, letting Samuel and the younger midwives take more of the calls, though she never fully stopped. There were still women who requested her specifically, who trusted only her voice to guide them through their labors. On a spring morning in 1910, Garrett woke before dawn and slipped out of bed without waking Martha. He walked out to the porch and watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. He heard the door open behind him and felt Martha's arms slip around his waist. Could not sleep, she asked. Did not want to. Too many beautiful mornings ahead, cannot afford to miss any of them. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up. A mockingbird sang from the cottonwood tree, and in the distance, horses nickered in the pasture. It was a morning like 1,000 others they had shared, and yet each one felt precious and unique. "Do you remember the first time I asked you to sing to me?" Garrett said suddenly. "Of course. You were standing by the fence looking lost and hopeful. I was about to say something stupid like, 'Will you sing to me forever?' But I chickened out." Martha laughed. "You did say it in your own way. You said you wanted to see where this went." "And we went everywhere together," Garrett said, turning to face her. "We built a home and raised children and created something real and lasting. All because I heard you singing that night." "All because you had the courage to approach me," Martha corrected. "You could have walked away. Many men would have. But you stopped and listened, and then you came back." "Best decision I ever made." "Mine too," Martha agreed, and they kissed in the dawn light, still in love, still choosing each other, still grateful for the miracle of having found one another. By 1915, they had 5 grandchildren, with more on the way. Rose had married a rancher from the next valley over, and together they had expanded the Kane holdings into one of the most successful operations in the region. Samuel had married a teacher from Denver, and they had settled in Ouray, where he continued to practice medicine with a skill and compassion that reminded everyone of his mother. Daniel, now 17, was studying veterinary medicine, determined to work with animals the way his father had done for so many years. Lucy still came to visit several times a year, bringing her grown son Thomas and regaling them with stories from the mining camps. Emily and the other women Martha had trained would stop by to consult on difficult cases, or just to sit on the porch and talk about the mysteries and miracles of birth. The house was always full of life and laughter, exactly as Martha and Garrett had dreamed it would be. On their 37th anniversary, Garrett gave Martha a gift he had been working on for months. It was a book, hand-bound, containing all the songs they had sung together over the years. He had written out the lyrics and musical notations, illustrated it with drawings of wildflowers and mountains, and included notes about what each song meant to them, when they had first sung it together, memories associated with the melodies. Martha cried as she turned the pages, seeing their entire life together reflected in music. There was the Scottish tune from that first night, the hymns from church, the lullabies they had sung to their children, the silly songs they made up while working around the ranch, the ballads they harmonized on quiet evenings. It was a chronicle of their love, written in notes and verses. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she said through her tears. "Thank you does not seem like enough." "Then just sing with me," Garrett replied. "That is all I have ever wanted." So they sang together, their voices aged but still true, still blending in perfect harmony. They sang of heather and hills and coming home, and they sang of grace and redemption, and they sang of love that endured through time and trial. And in the singing, they found again what they had always found, each other, and the certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. In 1923, when Martha was 65 and Garrett was 69, they attended the wedding of their youngest grandchild. It was a joyous occasion, held at the ranch with the whole family gathered. During the ceremony, the bride asked Martha to sing, and without hesitation, Martha agreed. But when she opened her mouth, Garrett's voice joined hers immediately, and together they sang the old Scottish tune that had started their own love story 45 years before. Every person present knew the story of how the midwife and the cowboy had found each other. It had become legend in Ouray and the surrounding areas, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. Young couples would ask for Martha and Garrett's advice about love and marriage. Parents would tell their children about the power of listening to your heart. And always, people would ask Martha to sing. That night, after the wedding guests had left and the family had retired to various rooms throughout the house, Garrett and Martha walked out to the pasture where they had stood on so many evenings before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky. Somewhere an owl called and the horses moved softly in the darkness. How did we get so lucky? Martha wondered aloud. To have all this, to have each other for so long. I do not think it was luck, Garrett replied. I think we chose it every day. We chose to love each other, to work through the hard times, to celebrate the good times, to build something that would last. Do you think it will last? Beyond us. I know it will, Garrett said with certainty. Look at our children and grandchildren. Look at what they are building. We gave them a foundation of love and dedication and integrity, and they are creating their own miracles on top of it. That is immortality, Martha. Not living forever ourselves, but living on through the ones we love and the example we set. Martha leaned against him, and they stood there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. After a while, she began to hum, and Garrett joined in, and their voices rose together into the starlit sky, a testament to a love that had transformed two lives and rippled outward to touch countless others. The seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn, and back to winter again. Garrett's steps grew slower, and Martha's hands developed arthritis that made the fine motor work of midwifery more difficult. But they adapted, they persevered, and they never stopped choosing each other. In the spring of 1930, Garrett fell ill with pneumonia. It hit hard and fast, and despite Samuel's best efforts and Martha's devoted nursing, they all knew he would not recover. The family gathered, filling the house with love and quiet tears. Garrett lay in the bed he had shared with Martha for 52 years, weak but at peace. On his last day, when breathing had become difficult and speech almost impossible, Garrett gestured for Martha to come close. She climbed into bed beside him, carefully arranging herself so she would not hurt him, and took his hand. "Sing to me," Garrett whispered. "One more time." So Martha sang. She sang the Scottish tune, and she sang the hymns, and she sang the lullabies they had crooned to their children. Her voice cracked and broke with grief, but she sang anyway because he had asked, because it was what she could give him, because it was how they had always communicated the things too deep for words. Garrett's breathing eased as she sang, and a smile touched his lips. He squeezed her hand weakly, and his eyes, still clear despite the illness ravaging his body, held all the love of a lifetime. When Martha finished the Scottish tune, he drew in one more breath and released it slowly. His hand went slack in hers, and he was gone. Martha sat with him for a long time, tears streaming silently down her face, still holding his hand. The family gave her space, understanding that she needed these final moments alone with him. When she finally emerged from the room, she looked 10 years older, but there was also a strange kind of peace on her face. "He heard me sing," she told her children. "At the end, he heard me sing. That was all he wanted." They buried Garrett on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Colorado, all the people whose lives he had touched over his 74 years. Martha stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren around her, and when the preacher finished his words, she sang. It was the last thing Garrett had heard in this life, and she wanted it to be the thing that sent him on to whatever came next. Her voice rang out clear and strong, infused with all the love and sorrow and gratitude she felt. Others joined in, harmonizing until the hillside was filled with music. And in that moment, Martha felt Garrett's presence so strongly that she looked around, half expecting to see him standing beside her. He was not there, not in body, but she knew he was listening. He would always be listening. The months after Garrett's death were the hardest of Martha's life. She had never been alone, not really, and his absence left a hole that nothing could fill. She moved through her days mechanically at first, doing what needed to be done because habit demanded it. But slowly, with the support of her family and the demands of her calling, she found her way back to something resembling life. Women still called for her when they went into labor. Martha still went, still sang, still brought new life into the world. But now when she sang, she felt like she was singing for Garrett too, knowing he was somewhere listening, somewhere smiling that half smile he always got when she hit a particularly beautiful note. She lived another 12 years after Garrett died, 12 years of watching grandchildren become adults, of holding great-grandchildren in her arms, of continuing the work she had dedicated her life to. She never remarried, never even considered it. How could she, when her heart still belonged to a cowboy who had heard her sing one July evening and decided that sound was worth building a life around? In the summer of 1942, at the age of 84, Martha fell asleep in her chair on the porch and did not wake up. She died peacefully, with a smile on her face, and in the pocket of her dress was the book of songs Garrett had made for her all those years ago. Samuel found it when he was going through her things and broke down crying, and his own children gathered around him, offering comfort the way they had been taught. They buried Martha next to Garrett on the hillside, and 3 generations of the family she had helped bring into the world stood witness. At the funeral, her granddaughter Rose, named for Martha's daughter, stood up to sing. She had inherited her great-grandmother's gift, and her voice rang out over the assembled mourners, singing the old Scottish tune about heather and hills and coming home. As the last notes faded into the mountain air, everyone felt it, a sense of completion, of a circle closing, of a love story that had begun with a song and ended the same way. Martha and Garrett were together again, and somehow everyone knew that wherever they were still singing. The ranch stayed in the family, passing through the generations. The little house in Ouray became a medical clinic run by Martha's descendants, many of whom followed her into midwifery and medicine. The book of songs was carefully preserved and became a treasured family heirloom, passed down along with the stories of the midwife who sang to laboring mothers and the cowboy who heard and knew he had found his home. In the years that followed, when new babies were born into the Kane family, someone would always sing the old Scottish tune, the one that had started it all. And in the singing, Martha and Garrett lived on, their love a testament to the power of listening to your heart, of being brave enough to speak your truth, of choosing someone and then choosing them again every single day for a lifetime. The town of Ouray grew and changed, but it never forgot the story of Martha Hayes and Garrett Kane. Young couples still visited their graves on the hillside, asking for their blessing. Midwives still sang to laboring mothers, carrying on a tradition that Martha had made sacred. And on quiet evenings, when the wind came down from the mountains just right, people swore they could hear two voices blending in perfect harmony, singing of heather and hills and coming home, singing of a love that death itself could not silence. The Kane family prospered through wars and depressions, through changes and challenges, anchored always by the foundation Martha and Garrett had laid. They taught their children and grandchildren about commitment and compassion, about the importance of calling and community, about the transformative power of love. And always, they taught them to sing, because in singing they connected not just to each other but to the two people who had started it all on a dusty July evening in 1878. Decades turned into a century, and still the story endured. Still the songs were sung. Still new life came into the world, attended by women who knew the power of melody to ease pain and fear. Still people fell in love and built lives together, inspired by the example of a midwife and a cowboy who had taken a chance on each other and created something beautiful and lasting. The ranch eventually became a heritage site, preserved by the family as a testament to their history. The original house was carefully maintained, with Martha's medical instruments on display in glass cases and Garrett's hand-built furniture still solid and serviceable. School children visited on field trips and learned about life in the Old West, about the importance of midwives in frontier communities, about how love could flourish even in the harshest conditions. But more than that, they learned about listening. About how Garrett had stopped in the middle of his busy life, had heard something beautiful, and had the courage to follow that beauty to its source. About how Martha had trusted her instincts, had seen past the rough exterior to the good heart beneath. About how two people who might never have met, who came from different backgrounds and had different dreams, had found common ground in music and built a life that outlasted them both. In the museum section of the house, visitors could press a button and hear a recording made in the 1930s, just before Garrett died. It was Martha singing the Scottish tune, her voice aged but still lovely, and underneath it, barely audible, Garrett's voice joining in harmony. The recording was poor quality, made on primitive equipment, but the love in those voices transcended the technical limitations. People would stand there listening with tears in their eyes, moved by the evidence of a love that had spanned more than half a century. The Book of Songs was displayed in a climate-controlled case, open to a random page that Garrett had illustrated with drawings of wildflowers. His handwriting was neat and careful, and in the margins he had written notes. Sang this while gathering eggs, Martha's favorite for rainy days. First song we taught Samuel. Each entry was a tiny window into their daily life, a reminder that great love stories were not just about grand gestures, but about 1,000 small moments of connection and joy. As the 21st century dawned, the youngest Kane descendants scattered across the country, pursuing careers and dreams their great-great-grandparents could never have imagined. But they all came home to Ouray eventually, drawn by the pull of family and heritage and the stories that had shaped them. They came to walk the land that Garrett had worked, to stand in the room where Martha had practiced her healing art, to sing the songs that had bound two hearts together across time. And in the singing, Martha and Garrett lived on. Not as names in a history book or figures in an old photograph, but as a living presence, a reminder of what was possible when two people truly saw each other, truly chose each other, truly committed to building something that would outlast their mortal years. The love story of the midwife and the cowboy had become more than just their story. It had become a touchstone, a beacon, a promise that love like that was real and attainable. It had become proof that a single moment, a single choice, a single song could change everything. And it had become a legacy that would endure as long as there were people who believed in the transformative power of love, who understood that the greatest adventures were not found in distant lands, but in the hearts of those brave enough to open themselves fully to another human being. On the hillside overlooking the ranch, two graves stood side by side, weathered by more than a century of Colorado seasons. The headstones were simple, bearing just names and dates and a single line of inscription that someone had added years after they died. They sang together. It was enough. It said everything that needed to be said about Martha Hayes Kane and Garrett Kane, about a life shared, and a love that had begun with a song and had never, ever ended.